Hi everybody. So I thought I'd do a weird review of a show that is not at all that recent. In fact, it's more than a decade old. But I just heard news of a possible reboot coming to the show, so this kind of inspired me to do this review. Um and that is of course of the show Charmed. I'll talk about the quote unquote reboot later, but yeah, I just thought I've been sort of planning on doing this forever. This show does have a very special place in my heart. Um, it it's my childhood basically. That's what the show is. Well, kind of like my late childhood. Like I started watching the show around the age of 9 or 10, and it was just an obsession from that point onwards. And it lasted for a very long time. I mean, there were points, like a couple years after I first started watching it, there were points where I would just not really watch any other show other than Charmed. Especially when it came out on Netflix a few years ago. I was so excited when I first saw it on there, and I just could not stop watching it. My parents were actually kind of but yeah, that's how much I was totally infatuated with the show. Um, that's a little backstory on how I began to watch it. I actually started watching it for the first time in season 5. It caught my eye because it had Rose McGowan in it, which was from Scream, which we know she was from Scream, and um, Scream was my favorite movie back then. Yeah, I was allowed to watch that when I was like 9 or 10. But yeah, that is really what caught my eye about the show. Before, when my mom used to watch it when I was really really young, I would just pass it by as another boring show. Like another boring mom show that only adults are into. But you know, I'll get into season 5 later, but that's basically the point where I watched the show. And I started from the episode Happily Ever After. I think that's what's called. That's the first episode I've ever watched of Charmed. And the show is like that. You can just pick it up from any point and you'll get it eventually. The plot isn't really that complicated. It's like the enemy of the week. That's it. There's like no really. And if there is sort of a story that's consistent throughout the season, you'll you'll pick up on it pretty quickly. The show is, I think that's what makes the show great for reruns. But yeah. Anyway, that's a little backstory on how I watched it. And obviously, since I was a kid back then, I didn't really have much of an eye for clever writing, or I was pretty much down for comedics, slacking and stuff like that. I wouldn't really have cared. I mean, literally, the show could have thrown any shit at the screen, and I would have been totally fine with it. But if I would have started watching it, say, like right now, like now that I am kind of an adult, I think my opinion might have been drastically different. Um, but yeah, especially since the later seasons do carry somewhat of a more light tone than the earlier seasons do. But anyway, let's get on to season 1. Well, I would say, if I would have watched this as a kid, if I would have just picked up on this, if the pilot were the first episode I watched of the show, then I probably would not have liked it at all. The first episodes, I thought when I first watched them as a kid, I looked them up on YouTube and I found them on YouTube and I just immediately started watching the first 10 episodes. And I have to admit, I was really, really bored. I was. If I didn't start off from the drastically different season 5, then I would have been really bored. It didn't really feel like charm to me at all. But if I would have started watching it now, I think season 1 would have been one of my favorite seasons. Um, back then, as a kid, you don't really appreciate the clever dialogue or the writing because back then they talked a lot more like adults. They used a lot. They used a lot. I could just tell that the dialogue that they were using was very cleverly placed, and of course, sometimes they still use references. Um, they still use references from pop culture at the time that I still don't really understand. But like when Piper says, "It's me," like she says in one episode in season one, Piper is mad that Phoebe and Prue are kind of making her do all the work for this dinner, and Piper says, "Oh, don't worry. I'll handle it all by myself. It's me, the culinary pachyderm." I still to this day do not get what that reference means. Is that like a reference from some cartoon at the time? I don't know. I googled it and I couldn't find anything. So, but I thought that was I don't know. Yeah, and the whole Mr. Congeniality thing. Since when does anybody today ever use that? But yeah, despite those references that I still really don't understand, I think the dialogue is really clever and the writing is really clever, and I can appreciate it more now that I understand these types of things better than I would have ever had when I was a kid. I might have butchered that whole thing. I'm sorry. But yeah, season one, I would say now is probably one of my favorite seasons. The characters. Um, okay, let's start off. In the pilot, you're introduced to the characters. You're introduced to Piper and Prue first, and apparently, um, they're living in their grandmother's house that was willed to them after she passed away. Um, and Phoebe, the other sister, um, lost her job. She moved to New York and she lost her job and she's in debt apparently. And she comes back to live with them at the manor. And Prue is not happy about this because she views Phoebe as somewhat of a slacker screw up. And you know before Phoebe left, they were always kind of looking out for her, and she was always kind of getting into trouble. And Prue just didn't want to deal with that, obviously. Plus, there was this whole drama thing where Phoebe apparently slept with her fiance. Um, and yeah, Prue. You almost forget that Prue was pretty much engaged before the show even before the show even started. You meet Roger in the pilot, and he's kind of a dick. He I don't know, maybe he's just mad at Prue for wanting not like returning his engagement ring or something. I'm not sure, but he kind of tortures her at work and steals exhibits away from her, and Prue finally stands up to him and quits. Which was yeah, I thought that added kind of an extra layer to the pilot because yeah, I really enjoyed the pilot. Um, the second episode, I actually kind of liked too. Um, when I first watched it as a kid, it bored me to death, and even The Vanquish didn't really entertain me that much. But there was some real character development that I can now appreciate when I watched the second episode today. Piper is growing into this whole thing where she's afraid they're evil, and she is hesitant to even step into church out of fear of being smited by the Almighty God. um, and Prue, I kind of forget what Prue's doing. I think she is, she wants to get this new job at an auction house, I think, which she does land. Um, and Phoebe is sort of going wild with their new powers. She hasn't quite learned the concept of personal gain yet, and she um, and she gets a premonition um, of the lottery numbers, and she uses that to win the lottery. But that doesn't work out because you can't use your magic for personal gain. They finally learned that lesson. And what always kind of gets me about this episode is they imply that Phoebe has somewhat control of her powers. Like, she didn't really elaborate on how, the premonitions just happen against her will. Like, she just touches them, she touches something. So what is she supposed to do? Like, when Prue sort of like accuses her and sort of scolds her for using her magic, like she thinks that like it's like Prue's telekinesis power. Like, she can just make stuff move at will, but she can't. She can't have premonitions at will. So that always kind of confused me. I guess they implied that somewhat Phoebe can use her powers whenever she wants, but that turns out not to be the case. And later on, and Phoebe didn't really elaborate on the fact that she really does have no control over it, and that it does happen at random. Like, what is she supposed to do? Just not touch anything? But yeah. Um, One thing that kind of bugs me about the show are the certain inconsistencies. Um, in the plot, like you can tell that they didn't really plan the whole thing out. They were just kind of going with emotions sometimes. When it comes to their powers, you can tell that there's certain inconsistencies there. Like, they sort of switch up the rules throughout the show of what they can and cannot do. Let's take Leo for an example. Apparently, you find out later on that he can only use his powers when they want him to, like when the elders want him to. Um, but, you see him later on in the show healing broken glass and heating a cup of coffee. But, he can't heal, people who aren't hurt by evil, even though he heals Piper's paper cut later on. It's really inconsistent. That's what kind of bugs me about the show. But, whatever. Just have to accept it. I do enjoy the show still. Um, Anyways, yeah, season 1 was really a lot of fun. Um, Piper, being the neurotic little sister, is always kind of stressed out about work, and Prue kind of handles her work stress a little bit better than Piper does. Piper just turns into this neurotic freak sometimes, but it's part of her character, and I think she's really funny. Um, I somewhat do think that she is, you know, like a little underused. Like, Prue and Phoebe definitely get more screen time than she does, and their issues are definitely more pressing than hers are. Like, I don't know, especially, she seems kind of separate from the whole witchly duty sometimes. Like, take for instance, From Fear to Eternity. I think that's Barbas's first appearance. She's basically separate from them throughout the entire episode. You could have, I wish they would have found some way to include Piper in that, because Piper never has to deal with it. And also, the Guardian of the Urn. Piper doesn't really have to deal with that either. It's all about Prue and Phoebe. And I wish they would have just like included Piper in more things, and like they just kind of put her to the sidelines a lot of the time. And she does have a couple of her episodes where she does have her own little adventure. For instance, her turning into a Wendigo, and her trying to save Leo from dying from a dark lighter. But they don't include her as much as I really want them to. Like, she seems, out of all of them, she seems the most oblivious to her power. She seems like she is a lot less willing and a lot less enthusiastic later on about her powers. She just kind of seems disconnected from being a witch, and she is pretty much the one who accepts it the least, and that becomes really apparent later on. But that, I guess, That's fine. The only thing that really bugs me is that they don't really include her that much in a lot of the season 1 action. She's not really that proactive. She's not really as proactive as Phoebe and Prue are. This kind of reminds me of a season 4 quote. Like, Prue and Phoebe were the super witches. I just tagged along and freeze things. Oh wait, that was like at the end of season 3 when she said that. But yeah, that's kind of what she always does. She's not really that proactive. She's just kind of like, she's just on the sidelines, and whenever they need her to freeze something, they just do that. She just does that. But yeah. So let's get into Prue's storyline for this season. Let's talk about Prue a little bit. So Prue she works at an auction house, and apparently she is only hired there because their bosses are warlocks, pretty powerful ones at that, and they want to hire her to siphon them out. And apparently they cannot confront them directly, so they use a tactic to learn about them, to learn about their moves and stuff like that. And they're sort of, playing behind the scenes. They sort of like set things up, like in The Witch's Back, which is one of my favorite episodes of the season, when they summon Melinda Warren back there. Yeah. They don't realize that Rex and Hannah are evil until episode 10. I always thought like that should have been like the mid-season finale, but no. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, Prue works at an auction house. She's the big sister, so she is the most mature one. She is the one who takes charge and everything. And I have to say, I really like Prue's character. I think I like Piper and Phoebe a little bit more than I like her. But you can tell that she has an underlying damage to her. Like, she's kind of damaged from the inside out. She has a lot to overcome. She's kind of repressed emotionally. And you can tell that the one thing that affected her more than anything, the one thing that affected her life more than anything was her mother's death. Even though she didn't quote unquote cry at her funeral, her death pretty much affected her life more than Piper and Phoebe's. But yeah, that one event kind of is what defines her character, in my opinion. Because because of her mother dying, she had to sacrifice her own childhood to help raise Piper and Phoebe, and that kind of turned her into the person that she is. And the fact that she never actually really got over her mother's death is another thing as well. You can just tell that Prue is kind of really damaged inside. But she does eventually kind of overcome that. But she still has this whole thing where she is kind of afraid of death. And she has to learn to overcome that as well. So, yeah, that is Prue. Phoebe is the younger sister, troublemaker. You know how the order goes. The oldest is the most mature, the middle is sort of the tiebreaker, and the youngest is their most rebellious. So, Phoebe, I started off the show really, really liking Phoebe, but by the end of the show, she becomes somewhat of a very different person. Like, if you compare season 1 Phoebe to season 8 Phoebe, there is nothing familiar. Absolutely nothing familiar about any of them. I mean, like, I get like character progression and stuff like that, but they really don't keep any familiar elements to Phoebe as the show goes on. But starting off in season 1, she is this really, quick-witted character. I really enjoy her. She's really fun. She brings kind of this whole spunk and light and optimism to the show that Piper and Prue don't really share. And I think Phoebe is a really, since her power is quote unquote the weakest out of all of them, she makes up for that by being useful in other ways, you know. And because they realize that her power is, and because they realize that her power basically does nothing but, you know, see the future, um, they make her learn how to fight later on. And yeah, she picks it up kind of quickly. I would say that's kind of a plot hole, but anyways. Um, yeah, so Phoebe's story arc throughout the entire season is the fact that, you know, I don't really know. I don't really think Phoebe has that consistent of a story. She does get a job twice. Once as, she works for, I don't know, like a rental property service or something, I'm not sure. Then she gets a job as Prue's intern, and I thought that was really fun. But overall, Phoebe is just going through the motions, you know, helping people. She's a really caring individual, and I can definitely see that. She definitely cares a lot about the innocents, and I think she's definitely the one um, who would actually sort of die for an innocent. They can tell that Piper and Phoebe probably wouldn't really sacrifice themselves to save anybody when the show starts up, but Phoebe definitely would. Um, that's sort of how I take it. And Phoebe doesn't really have like a romance, she doesn't really have a job. So nothing's really going on with Phoebe during season 1, other than the fact that she is, you know, a really fun character and basically witchcraft. But yeah, that's Phoebe for you. I forgot to mention one other thing too. Andy and Daryl. Daryl in the first season is basically nothing but Andy's boss. You know, like they work together and they're both detectives. Daryl becomes a more useful character later on, but for now he's just there. Really, keeping an eye on Andy. And Andy is Prue's love interest for the season. You know, Andy for me was kind of a bland character. There wasn't really anything that much to him, other than the fact that he really loved Prue and that he became really suspicious of them. And this is a running theme throughout the entire show. Like, there's always a cop or a journalist that is sort of, you know, on their shit, and sometimes that can get a little annoying. And this is the first time they do it, and I don't think they really overdo it at all. But there's a conflict of interest there because Andy used to have a relationship with Prue. And then he eventually finds out and becomes sort of their ally. But, you know, as interesting as that could have actually been, that only lasts for like a couple episodes, which is really sad. And then he gets killed off in the finale. So yeah, he is never really mentioned again outside of episode 1. There's like a few more glitz of active footage, but yeah. He dies, Prue's devastated, and yeah, let's talk about the season finale for just a tiny bit. So apparently they get stuck in a time loop, and they hire this one demon to try to, and Tempest, a demon, tries to hire this one demon to kill them and get it right. You know, every time the demon dies, he learns from his mistakes and he tries to adjust it, which I thought was really creative. And I thought the season finale was overall really good. It wasn't one of my favorites. It definitely was one of the more mellow ones, but yeah, I thought it was really entertaining and I thought it was really good. Overall, the season was one of my favorites. I can definitely appreciate the clever writing and the fact that this is more of a character development season and it focused more on their relationship as siblings rather than the all-powerful evil that they fight every week. Yeah, those are my overall thoughts. Thanks for watching, and season 2 will be later. Bye.